Nelson's flagship HMS Victory, a fantastic reminder of Britain's naval supremacy in the 19th century. But Portsmouth's history as a seaport goes back to medieval times. In the 13th century, the harbour was a bit further along the coast, and close by was the hospital, which back then wasn't just a place for the sick, but also provided accommodation for travellers. This church was originally part of that hospital, and Time Team have been asked to find the complex of medieval buildings that would have stretched out into this field. You'd have thought that would have been a pretty easy task, but we know that a Tudor mansion was built on top of it, not to mention a whole load of Second World War activity, including a number of German bombs falling here. So can we get at the medieval history without calling in the bomb squad? We'll know in 72 hours. The deep natural harbour at Portsmouth made it a much-used crossing point to France in medieval times, and the town went on to become the most heavily defended in England after Henry VIII made it the base for the Royal Navy in the 16th century. Our site at Governor's Green sits within one of the last remaining defensive walls that enclosed the old town, and the Garrison Church, as it's known today, was originally part of a medieval hospital built here in the 13th century. This building survived because it was used as a chapel for a Tudor mansion, and then later on it became a place of worship for the armed forces until a bomb destroyed the roof in World War II. Tim, you're a member of the Friends of the Garrison Church, aren't you?
I work with them, yes.
And you invited us here?
I did.
Why? What did you want to find out?
Well, there's a 300-year gap between when the church was built in 1212 and the first reliable map we've got in about 1540. So, yes, if you can paint a picture that covers that period, it would be wonderful.
We'll do our best. Martin, you work for the MOD.
Yes.
The MOD has never allowed anyone to dig here before, but you've managed to wangle it for us. How come?
Well, with a lot of sites, because no one's ever dug on them, we don't know what's going on. So I've got that same gap. So if you guys can help fill that gap for us and help us manage it better, I'll be really happy.
Well, there's only one man who's going to help us find that out. Come and meet Mick. Mick, when we talk about a medieval hospital, what exactly do we mean?
We mean a place where old people would have lived, sick people would have lived, but also just a place where travellers would have stayed. So it's accommodation for various types of people.
So apart from anything else, it was also a hotel?
Yeah, that's a way of thinking of it, yeah.
Helen, do we know much about this one?
We do. One of the amazing resources we've got are loads and loads of maps, because Portsmouth was so important for the defence of Britain. It was important to know what was where. And this one is, would you believe, mid-16th century.
Where's our hospital?
The hospital's just here.
This map, made around 1540, is thought to be one of the first accurate maps drawn in England. It was made to show the defences around the town, but it also gives us our earliest depiction of the hospital site. As usual, Mick wants to wait to see what geophys are detecting under the ground before we decide where to dig. But clearly it would be good to know if any of the early maps are accurate enough in modern terms to be useful to us. Dominic Fontana, a geography lecturer at Portsmouth University, has overlaid a modern map of the town onto a Tudor map.
And as soon as it comes up, you'll see that it drops in with the streets in exactly the right location.
So these are the street lines here, the yellow and black lines.
That's
there.
right.
It drops in exactly over the street lines, doesn't it?
Perfect. I didn't expect that. That's fantastic.
It's an astonishingly good fit.
Dominic's map, dated 1584, is especially interesting because it shows a more detailed picture of the hospital. It shows a complex of buildings with a wall round them, and having lined it up with the modern map, we can see that this road once continued along the edge of the hospital site.
If we take a line from the centre of that building and draw it down here...
Using this information, Stuart and Henry are going to try and plot where the old medieval road used to run across this area. This would be extremely helpful to know, because the road marks the eastern edge of the hospital site, and all the medieval buildings we're looking for should be on this side of the road. The hospital was dedicated to St Nicholas, the patron saint of sailors, But locally, it would have been known as the Domus Dei, meaning the House of God, a place that looked after travellers, the poor and the sick, but was first and foremost a religious institution.
The most important thing for a medieval man or woman was their fate after death. And this was what really mattered to them. Are you going to burn in hell in eternity? And to avoid this, you either set up a hospital or work in one, or you pray for the people who've assisted you. And the man who founded this hospital had quite a need for spiritual insurance.
Who was that?
He was Peter de Roche, and he founded it in 1214 or possibly a couple of years earlier. And he was Bishop of Winchester, but apart from that, I don't know a lot about him.
He was Bishop of Winchester, but he was, most importantly, the second most powerful man in England. In 1214, he was actually running England while King John was overseas. So these men have tremendous political and financial power, as well as actually running a diocese and acting as a minister of God. It's like doubling up as, well, Chancellor of the Exchequer and Archbishop of Canterbury, which is no small thing.
The local people who are involved in the hospital society are really keen that we should try to bring to life those 300 years when it was a medieval hospital. Does that excite you, or is this pretty standard fare?
No, it's not standard fare, because in common with many places, the records of this place were lost at the dissolution, as well as a lot of the building. And so we're very, very dependent on the archaeology for this one, and I'd be really interested just to learn what it looks like on the ground. How big was it?
Potentially, we could have evidence of some of Portsmouth's earliest stone buildings buried here. So are geophys detecting anything under the ground? John, how you getting on?
Not you hassling me.
How long?
Well, 5 minutes.
The geophys team hates this bit because we're on their back so much, but I love it. It's such a feeling of anticipation. As soon as that information has been through the printer, we could get our first glimpse of a 13th century hospital.
You'll have it. I'm confident, looking at the readings in the machine.
In 4.5 minutes.
4.5 minutes.
Welcome back to Governor's Green in Portsmouth, where we're waiting to see if our geophys team have managed to detect the remains of a medieval hospital thought to be buried under this field. 4 minutes 40, John. You've got 20 seconds to go.
Oh, there we are. This is just the resistance so far. Just to orientate, there's the church. And Stuart talked about a road line coming through here. And what we've got in black, that's the high resistance. So these are all buildings and actually rooms within buildings or separate buildings. I mean, there's so much detail going on. I need more time to actually sort out everything.
But you see, that's where we come in, John. We put the trenches in to tell you what that geophysics means.
I mean, it looks as if we've got lots of lines of walls and buildings there, doesn't it?
Yeah, they may be the later Tudor house, but I guess that's probably a conversion of the medieval buildings anyway.
So, I mean, I'd go in for a junction.
Yeah, let's do a junction where we've got walls of both directions. Somewhere like that point there, Phil, in the middle there, I reckon.
I reckon that's perfect.
So with no time to waste, Phil gets our first trench going. The plan is to open up a large area to see exactly what geophys are detecting here. This 3x5 metre trench is targeted here, over what appears to be a junction between several walls. But we don't know if this is part of the original medieval hospital or the later Tudor buildings on this site.
Yeah, that's hard there again.
Geophys, in fact, may have detected some modern stuff here, because already Phil's wondering if he's uncovering a concrete surface.
God, I hope we ain't got all the archaeology underneath concrete. Don't bear thinking about, do it?
While we don't know how much of the hospital survives out in the field, we do know that this church was at the centre of the complex. Richard, our buildings expert, is taking a close look so that we can reconstruct how it looked originally when it was first built in the 13th century. One thing's for sure, this building has got a lot of stories to tell. Like when the hospital closed in 1540 and the governor of Portsmouth took over the site and used the church to store weapons.
We've got a list of the things that were stored in the church. That's fantastic.
Shovels and spades, Scoops, bloke bills, Morris picks, chests of bows and arrows, serpentine powder. This is wonderful stuff. This book, A History of the Church, looks like it could be really useful to us.
It's called the Domus Dei of Portsmouth by a man called H.P. Wright, who was the military chaplain here, and he was behind the restoration of the church.
The book includes references to a lot of original documents, one of which is a bill for the repair of the medieval buildings in 1581.
The church 25 foot wide, the armoury 6 and 50 foot long, the smith's forge 32 foot long. And what is then done, which is perhaps a bit speculative but still quite a lot of fun, is he's taken one of the contemporary plans and he's tried to attach the labels to these buildings you can see here.
So this is a plan of what this area would look like, not when it was a hospital, although these are the same buildings, but after it had been taken over by the military, so that we've got things like the armoury, the smith's forge and the pay chamber.
Yes.
We could test this, couldn't we, mate?
Yeah, I mean, no matter how accurate that is, to have a list of buildings and the dimensions of them is fantastically useful.
Our Victorian book also includes this plan, which is based on the same information. If it's accurate, then our mission to find some of Portsmouth's oldest buildings should be simple. All we have to do is align the plan with the modern map and the geophys plot, and hey presto, we've got a blueprint showing where we need to dig to find any of the hospital buildings. So using the plan as a guide, we're going to open a new trench here. But as we open our second trench, I can't believe it's really going to be this easy. Can we really trust an old map from a Victorian book? Everyone else seems to think we can.
Oh, hello. Well, that wasn't very deep, was it?
This one here, this area is labelled Hall.
Yeah.
So these are kind of some of the more important buildings. The ones over there are more service buildings.
Yeah.
You think?
Think.
You may think I'm being a bit hard on them, but quite honestly, every time in day one, when they're as confident as this, it always turns to ashes. Mark my words. One of the few places on this site where we don't need a map is inside the church. And according to Mick, it's quite unusual to have the largest and most important part of the hospital still standing. I'd been thinking that this was simply where the religious services were carried out.
It's not quite like that, is it, Carol? This is the church and the main part of the hospital.
Explain.
No, this underscores the religious aspects of the hospital, because if you were a patient, you'd be lying in bed on the side here in the aisles.
Hang on, so you'd had a load of people all the way running down here?
Yeah. Yes, two to a bed.
I was just saying it's almost bed length.
They are, aren't they?
Those aisles, they're almost that width, and you can see why.
And more to the point, you would be able to hear the services and to see the sacrament of the Mass, which is supposed to make you better. So it's generally sort of elevating atmosphere where your soul is as healthy as your body, which is what they're aiming for.
Our artist Victor has been working on a sketch to picture this part of the building as it was in the 13th century.
It wasn't a monastic one, so just lay people looking after...
Just lay people. But there were priests here too, and they would be ministering to the spiritual needs of the patients. Yes. And some nurses as well, we think.
But still, the whole impression still looks like you're coming into a church in which sick people are laid out on each side.
Well, that's the whole point about this. In this period, the health of your soul is so much more important than your body. I mean, bodies don't last long in the Middle Ages, but your soul is forever.
It's getting late in the day and starting to get really cold out here. Although Trench 1 initially revealed a modern concrete surface, we've now uncovered what might be medieval stone, and we're starting to find some large chunks of pottery.
It's part of a big jug by the looks of it. It's huge. Beautifully made, nice and thick. I suppose we'll have to wait for the pot expert to have a look at this for us, won't we?
Yeah.
Oh. Better still, in Trench 2, it looks like we're starting to find evidence of a medieval building.
If you turn it over, you can actually see the tool marks running in an angle that direction.
Do we know anything about it yet?
We don't, because we've literally just opened it. We've got something that looks very modern looking in the top here, and then something very promising which looks much older.
Hang on. Oh. Richard perfectly arrived on time What do you think of that?
It's stone.
Thank you so much.
Even I know that.
That looks very much like 13th century stone. A little.
What makes you say that's 13th century?
Well, it looks like classic early English, which is our main architectural style of the 13th century. It's got this small sort of colonnette, rather nice sort of circular design, quite delicate, really.
What sort of part of a building might that come from?
It looks like it's part of a reveal or something, a window reveal or a door reveal.
So this may have been part of a medieval door frame like this. The doorway perhaps into a medieval room with a posh stone floor, because as you can see, Trench 2 seems to be getting better and better by the minute. End of day one. This trench over here, Trench 1, that's proved a bit disappointing. There's so much of that comparatively modern floor surface. But this trench, Trench 2, completely different matter. All the archaeologists are getting really excited about it, although you wouldn't know it, would it? It's so freezing cold.
So cold, I don't believe it.
But here we've got these flagstones, which are apparently Purbeck marble, and you think you've got a medieval wall coming up?
Certainly, this one is here with the door stop there for the door to go against it.
And it ties in apparently with the plans.
It does. It's on the same alignment to the row of buildings going in that direction.
So tomorrow we're going to extend the trench in this direction and see whether or not we've got at least a glimmer of our medieval hospital. Fingers crossed. Should we go home?
Yeah, let's go and have a drink.
I wouldn't mind a kebab. Welcome back to blustery Portsmouth. It's a city that's jam-packed with history. You can see these 18th and 19th century walls here, which once defended the old town. But our dig's on the far side of this tunnel. Nelson once walked through here, apparently. We're inside the old town walls now, and we're excavating over here on Governor's Green, where we're looking for a hospital which was put up here in the 13th century. The only bit of it still standing is that church over there. But it's complicated by the fact that this mansion was put up here in Tudor times. And I know from bitter experience that if you're looking for something really early on an urban site where they've plonked a building on top of it later on, then the archaeology is very complicated and very frustrating. Mark my words. We've opened 2 trenches so far, and it's Trench 2 nearest the church that looks the most promising.
So we just want double the size of the trench this way. And we may want to treble the size of it.
We've uncovered a posh floor surface here that could be part of the medieval hospital. But we've also got a series of walls that we don't understand. So today, we're going to supersize this excavation.
Almost there.
Over in Trench 1, Phil opened up a big area yesterday and found a lot of modern concrete, but he also revealed a few stone walls that could be medieval. So he too is extending his trench to help him work out what he's got here. Yesterday, everyone got excited about this plan, which supposedly shows the layout of the medieval buildings. After aligning the plan with the geophys, Stuart seemed happy that our 2 trenches were coming down on these 2 buildings. But today, Phil spotted a problem.
Where you've got your trench is on those geophysics.
No, it's not!
According to Phil, his trench has been marked in the wrong place on the plan.
We did not put the trench there. We did not. The trench is in there.
Well, John told me... yeah, exactly, it's there.
No.
It's over that building.
No, Stuart. This wall here is what I've got in the trench. Yeah. That does not appear on your map.
Well, it doesn't appear on that, no.
So which map does it appear on?
Well, it doesn't appear on any map at the moment.
Phil has rightly pointed out that his trench isn't positioned here, but targeted on this geophys signal. And the wall he's found is nowhere near the building shown on the plan.
We need more maps. We need more maps.
I agree with that.
That's what we need, more maps.
Phil suspects the plan's wrong or has been misaligned with the geophys plot, while Stuart thinks the problem could be that Phil's digging a wall that doesn't appear on any plan.
I think we should give Henry an hour to get these trenches and the features in them accurately plotted.
Yeah.
Because I think until we do that, we really don't know where we are on these
we need the
plans.
walls and the wall corners, something solid to hang on.
Yeah.
What a palaver. And I did predict this kind of thing might happen. Yesterday, you and Stuart were so confident that actually what was on the maps would be in the ground and right where you dug the trenches. It never works like that.
Stuart's still very confident about that.
The good news is that Henry has already mapped the walls in our trenches and he's now ready to compare them with what's on the plan.
And you all do this on the computer?
Yeah.
You see, I do it on a drawing board with tracing paper and a glass of Cabernet Sauvignon. That's my way of mapping.
You just make yourself sound even older than you are. Today, we've got some visitors who want to know about the history we're digging up under their sports field. Knowing our medieval hospital wasn't just for the sick, but was also a place where travellers could stay, we've arranged for a couple of 13th century pilgrims to stop off here on their travels. Who knows what a pilgrim is?
Is it a religious person who goes on long journeys? Oh, isn't it where they forgive their sins? They go to travel places to forgive their sins.
Correct, they do. And the harder the journey is, the more sins you can actually have removed from your soul.
Pilgrims coming through Portsmouth were most likely en route to visit shrines at Winchester and Chichester in England or other popular destinations like Santiago in Spain. Stephen, why are you here at the hospital?
I'm going to take ship from Portsmouth, but a place like this, they're regular along the route. We can actually stop and ask for food and rest if we need it as well, because obviously it's quite an arduous journey. It's being made on foot.
Every pilgrim carried a bag like this called a scrip, which was supposed to contain what they needed for the journey. Humble everyday items like a wooden bowl for food and drink, a knife, and a sewing kit to repair clothes.
Can you imagine I've got loads and loads and loads of food in there? I'm not going to carry much, am I? So that's why places like this are so important. People were supposed to have a holy duty to actually feed us, particularly religious institutions such as this.
Carol, when the pilgrims arrived here, they'd have stayed in this room, wouldn't they?
We don't know. They may have had a separate wing where travellers and people who wanted short-term hospitality stayed. This is what makes the excavation so exciting.
And we seem to be making good progress. Here in Trench 1, Phil's uncovered more stone walls. But he's still waiting to find out from the mapping team how they relate to the plan. Some of the finds, though, may be a clue to the function of this building.
It's what we call a panchion. They're mixing bowls, essentially, or food preparation vessels.
This is a great find, because it dates to the time just before we know the hospital was closed in 1540. But it doesn't help date the stone walls in this trench, because the soil's all been mixed up, and we're getting other finds like this.
Some thick glass there, isn't it?
This was once part of a massive wine bottle, which dates to the 18th century. This, maybe, is our first glimpse of the fine living enjoyed by the Governor of Portsmouth, who lived here at that time.
Moving a little bit later.
Duncan Brown, our pottery expert, has been looking at other finds from Phil's trench yesterday. This, again, is high quality and is part of a Spanish olive jar. These were used for transporting olive oil and preserved fruits.
So we're late 16th, 17th century, and I would say bang on with the governor's house myself.
Well, we must be in the outbuildings at the back of the governor's house in this part of the site.
Okay, well, that's good.
That's the governor's house there, presumably?
Yep.
This is our standing building, it's the chapel.
It's a tricky site, because although the governor's house started out as a Tudor mansion, it was modified and updated many times over the years, until it was finally demolished in 1825.
These are the trench positions here. What you've got in those trenches are the lines of the walls. That's right, isn't it?
Some of the walls we're finding may date to the later building on this site, but some may belong to medieval buildings that were reused as part of the governor's mansion. Crucially, to have a chance of understanding this site, we need to know where our trenches are in relation to our plan of the hospital. Consequently, our mapping team have been rechecking everything, including the measurements given for the medieval buildings.
We took the measurement for the church and scaled it from the map, 50 foot. Correct. chapel, 25 foot correct. The stables and bakehouse, 68 foot correct. But when we checked the 10, the larder,
right,
it says it's 100
foot long.
100 foot long. But when you scale it on the map, it's only 60 foot. So there's 40 foot missing. It actually should be that long on the plan, and the stable should be up there. So you've just got this one building, which is wrong.
I hate to sound somewhat sceptical, but, you know, if all the other buildings are right and the one that fills in is wrong, that does sound like a bit of special pleading, really.
It isn't, though, is it? I mean,
not at all.
We had the quality control here checking.
Well, I'll tell you what, I think over lunch you ought to tell him about that.
Have you got a hard out?
So, problem sorted. And if we now correct the plan, we can see Phil's trench is positioned across a building described as a larder. So we're talking food storage, one of the service buildings, while Trench 2 is located here, across a building described as a hall. This would be a higher status room, which seems to fit with the posh stone floor we've unearthed in this trench. This feels like a real turning point. But the challenge now is to make sense of the many different walls we've revealed and try to work out which ones are part of a medieval hall that was last seen hundreds of years ago. And now, with even sceptics like me having new confidence in the plan, we're opening up a third trench to see if we can find any evidence of these medieval buildings on the south side of the church. And having sorted out the maps, Stuart wants to get a look at our site from the air to see how it fits in with the rest of medieval Portsmouth. What's clear is just how close the cathedral is to our site. In medieval times, this was the parish church, and because it was founded in 1180, some 30 years before our hospital, it seems they got to impose a lot of rules on their new neighbours. No one from the hospital would be allowed to go on board ships to give benediction, preach or read the Gospels. That seems pretty severe. Why did they make that kind of rule?
Well, that's 1229, and the hospital is very, very successful very quickly. And this is a seaport, and so sailors who are leading a very dangerous life want spiritual protection.
Yeah, but it's saying that they can't go and
preach. And
preach.
that's the point, because the priests here have been doing just that, and the parish church does not like it because it's quite successful financially. They're making money, and they're undercutting the profits of the opposition.
Oh, so this is politics.
It's not just politics, it's money too.
It seems there was no shortage of people bequeathing money to the hospital, which means they'd have had the resources to upgrade or refurbish buildings over the years.
So maybe you've got a line of green ones and then a line of...
Here in Trench 2, where we hope to find evidence of a medieval hall, we've now got so many different walls and floors to puzzle over that Phil's been drafted across to help sort it out.
The crucial thing is if there's a green in there.
Oh. Take a little bit of this up. Oh yeah.
So there is a logical pattern.
This definitely looks like an in situ floor, but it's going to take time to work out how old it is. Our buildings expert, Richard, has spent much of the last 2 days studying the standing building, so we can tell the story of how it looked originally and how it was changed over 800 years. We're going to start in the early 19th century, when after hundreds of years of repairs, it had been reduced to this, and looked more like a scout hut. Then, in the 1870s, the Victorians painstakingly restored the building to look like this, pretty much how it would have looked in medieval times. All we have to do now to make it absolutely authentic is lose a few Victorian additions and change the roofline slightly. And we're now looking at the original infirmary for the sick and the chapel where religious services were carried out.
It's wonderful to see how the modern building looks so much like the original.
Let's hope by end of play tomorrow we'll have enough information to picture some of the other buildings that were part of the hospital. So far, our latest trench, Trench 3, close to the church, has only turned up lots of gravel.
Oh,
hey!
Oh, very nice. Oh, wow.
Although we have found a bit of medieval roof tile.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, there's the thumbprint in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's brilliant.
But as we approach the end of another bitterly cold day...
Ooh, what a funny thing.
It is, isn't it?
It is. It's really weird.
The most intriguing find has been found in Phil's trench.
I mean, it looks to me like it's sort of like it's got a crown motif on the top. Look, it's a triangle with 3 dots on the top.
My first reaction is that this looks almost homemade. You know, this is not the kind of standard ring you would buy in a shop. And if you look here, you can see the remains of it. It's had a kind of silvery, goldy kind of coating on it. And the colour of that looks very cheap and nasty to me.
It's not a seaside trinket, is it?
Well, yes, exactly. It's exactly the kind of thing I'm thinking. Oh, homemade for a sailor's sweetheart, you know. And also, look at the size of it. It does fit me extremely well.
Absolutely.
So I think it's more of a woman's size. I think to know a date, though, I'm going to have to go to some books and try to find a parallel because I have never seen anything quite like that before.
Don't tell me you've got books on seaside trinkets.
I've got books on everything.
Well, hopefully we'll find out more about this ring tomorrow. But right now, I'm interested in how we're doing unravelling the puzzle of different floors and walls here in Trench 2. This is the trench where yesterday afternoon we thought we'd find the medieval hospital. So 24 hours later, how are we doing? Well, these flagstones aren't medieval, maybe they're Tudor. This wall is apparently even later than that floor, as is that wall. And this wall, well, maybe it's medieval, but we don't really know. Phil, how did you come to that conclusion?
Well, what it boils down to, Tony, is that if you've got a building and then you knock it down and you put up another building, you are bound to destroy traces of the foundations of the earlier building. So let's say, take this floor here and that wall over there. This floor doesn't run right up to the wall. There's a gap. That couldn't possibly happen if they were the same building. That wall has been punched through that floor. So that floor is earlier, that wall is later.
Oh, you can see where they've punched through here, can't you?
Absolutely.
Broken teeth.
Absolutely. So this wall is again later than the floor. Yeah. This wall comes all the way along here, and there's a gap here. Yep. This wall has been punched through by this wall. That's got to be earlier. It might be the medieval one.
Well, tomorrow it looks like we're going to have to extend this trench even more to find out. But right now, everyone wants to get out of the cold and escape to the incident room. Or should I say the bar downstairs. Cheers. It's been a really tough day today. Have we found what we're looking for? Well, I hadn't heard one of these archaeologists tell me that anything in any of the trenches is definitely medieval.
I did.
No! But tomorrow they're going to sharpen up their axe, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. Tomorrow morning we're going to have a really good crack at finding that medieval hospital. Day 3 at Governor's Green in Portsmouth, where we now not only have the freezing wind to contend with, but driving rain to go with it. We're looking for the remains of a medieval hospital, but last night I was told that virtually everything here in our best trench is probably to do with a later Tudor mansion that was built here for the Governor of Portsmouth. With just one day left, I'm really going to be pushing to try and find a bit of the medieval hospital. Mick, come out from behind your brolly. What are you going to give us today?
Well, we've got the road. I don't know if you saw that.
Which road's that?
This is the road outside the precinct wall, which is this wall here.
And why does that help us with the medieval story?
Well, that's the edge of the precinct of the medieval hospital. This here, in some shape or form, must be the medieval boundary.
Well, that's good. We've now got the wall that marked the boundary of the medieval hospital and the road that ran beside it. But today, I'm hoping we can identify at least one of the medieval buildings that stood inside the wall. So we're widening this trench even more to help us work out which walls belong to the medieval hall shown on this plan. And if anyone can unpick the medieval archaeology from all the later stuff, it's got to be Phil. So I've just got to keep my fingers crossed.
Impressive, isn't it?
We have a fantastic picture of Portsmouth in 1545. It famously shows Henry VIII's ship, the Mary Rose, sinking. But more interesting to us, it shows the walled medieval town and our hospital situated inside. This was when the military had taken over the site and was storing weapons in the church.
So it is actually showing a good level of detail, isn't it, sir?
It really is. You can see the wall around the site.
This picture may also be showing the hall we're digging, which we know was next to the kitchens.
That looks tall chimney, either a kitchen or a hall, something there.
Quite probably, yes. It certainly shows some quite interesting windows.
Back on site, and there's been a development. Up until now, while we've suspected that walls in this trench may belong to the later use of this site, we've had no way of dating them. But John's been comparing this plan of the governor's house with the latest geophys results, and he's made an important discovery.
Look, there's the trench in red. Yeah. Look at that wall of the governor's house going through the middle. That wall there is clearly cutting that floor.
Oh,
So
wow. You asked us to find the medieval, right?
You're not saying that that floor, which we've been banging on about as probably a Tudor floor for the last 2 days, is medieval?
It's at least pre-1580. If this wall's going in 1580 with the governor's house, it smashes through something that's already there. So that's either 16th century or earlier.
Oh, that is so bizarre. So we might have had the hospital for the last 2 days. Amazing. It means that in among the confusion of all this, we've now established that this floor and this wall are part of a medieval building. And now we've got the rest of the day to prove it's the medieval hall shown on this plan. And right on cue, the sun makes a welcome return. So we shouldn't be slowed down by bad weather. All of a sudden, I'm feeling much happier.
Just see if we can encourage this leech to bite in.
Which is more than I can say for Stuart. He's about to experience a bit of medieval bloodletting by allowing this leech to bite into his vein.
Oh, he's looking at that, looks positive to me.
In medieval times, the practice of drawing out bad blood was believed to cure many illnesses. Oh, Stuart! Did you volunteer for that?
It is cool, isn't it?
Most often, a knife was used to cut a vein, but a leech like this would also do the job, although they were used less frequently.
You might have a leech used in specific circumstances, you know, coagulation of the blood, specific part of the body. But a lot of this is a myth. Most people wouldn't experience a leech in their lives, so you're an exceptional man, Stuart.
But this table is full of herbal medicines that would have been used at a medieval hospital. Herbs like rosemary and aniseed, which were used for raising people's spirits and aiding digestion.
If your digestion wasn't working properly, that would lead to illness. So something like this, something simple like that, is a very, very important medicine.
But what about a serious medical problem like a broken leg? Our osteoarchaeologist Jackie McKinley has brought some bones excavated at other medieval sites. This lower leg bone would normally look like this, but it was fractured and ended up like this.
So what you've got is actually a reduction in height of this individual of about almost 10 centimetres there, which is quite a height.
At this hospital, they could have reset the bone and then dressed the wound in bandages soaked in juice obtained by boiling the roots of a comfrey plant.
And that would be wrapped around the limb. And there is actually an active ingredient in the juice that's been extracted that encourages bone growth.
Jackie's also brought this mystery item, which was found inside the skeleton of a medieval man.
That's what a tapeworm would live inside of.
Oh. Have you got anything for that other than a pair of scissors?
I haven't got any vermifuges here, but there were herbs which would also seek to kind of vent your guts in a very violent way in order to try and remove them.
What makes me laugh is that Stuart, our patient, is listening to all this, apparently blithely unaware he's got a leech on his arm. But we need Stuart to get back to work, so we're going to apply a saline solution to encourage the leech to let go of Stuart's vein.
What are you going to call it, Stuart?
This is
I was going to call it John Gator, actually.
There we go. There we are.
It's good Yorkshire blood, is that? That's why you see
Outside the church, Mick's reviewing progress, and in particular Trench 3, which was put in here yesterday to find these medieval buildings.
I was really disappointed in this trench, Martin. I really thought we'd get something of the South Range that might have gone with the church.
Well, you and me both, really. We've backfilled it because it was becoming unsafe.
Yeah.
And what you've got in there is just layer upon layer of dumped gravel.
As you can see from this post-war photo, this area was once a parade ground used by the military in the 19th century, and it appears that any medieval buildings here were destroyed during the construction work. I have to admit I've been more interested in the medieval story than the later history on this site, but after finding out that one of the walls we've uncovered was part of the governor's mansion, I'm intrigued to know a bit more about it.
This one shows one side of it, so we've got our church there, and this one shows the front. Just before it was knocked down in 1826. Looks rather nice, doesn't it? And it was the scene of some of the most amazing moments. A few years before it was knocked down, in 1814, there was a massive 4-day party here to celebrate the defeat of Napoleon. And we've got a list of the people who were here. We've got the Prince Regent, with the Emperor of Russia, Frederick King of Prussia, Marshal Blücher, Prince Platoff, whoever he may be, and
they all came?
They all came. The Duke of Wellington did turn up 2 days late, but then perhaps he was allowed to.
Hang on, did you just say defeat of Napoleon in 1814?
Yeah, you're thinking of the Battle of Waterloo in 1815, aren't you? There was a bit of a problem because just as they were celebrating, I think he was escaping from Elba, and they had to do it all over again.
We may not have found anything belonging to the Emperor of Russia, but having cleaned up the ring we found yesterday, Helen believes it probably does date to the time the house was being demolished in the 19th century.
You can see much more clearly now what's going on.
I will do if I put my glasses on.
So in these 3 holes, there would have been stones. And then you can see here, there's an S, then there's an A, and then the big one there is an R. And then after that, he's had a go at doing an A or an H. It says Sarah. So I think it really is a bit of sentimental jewellery. It's for a sailor's girl. He's bought it. He's tried to write Sarah. Perhaps it hasn't quite worked. He might have chucked it away.
Well, yeah, maybe the relationship made him chuck it away.
With time running out, we've now stopped digging here in what was Phil's original trench. It's possible that we've turned up evidence of the larder or food store house shown on this plan, but it'll take a much longer dig to sort it out. With the people who invited us here starting to crowd around the trenches, all our efforts are now being focused here in Trench 2, where we'd like to be able to prove to them that we've found the medieval hall belonging to the hospital. Right now, Phil's extending this excavation yet again to see if he can find the western end of the building.
Mac?
Yeah?
I reckon I got it.
You think you've got it?
Yeah, I reckon I got it.
At last we've found what we think is another medieval wall, and it's parallel to the wall we've already identified at the other end of the trench. Now it feels like we're getting somewhere.
So it's going to be about that sort of width like that then?
Well, it's about that sort of width, but I'll tell you when I dug it.
Yeah.
It seems this medieval building didn't get updated to become part of the governor's mansion and would have gone out of use when the hospital was closed down by Henry VIII in 1540, along with the country's monasteries and other religious institutions.
What on earth did people do, though, if they were used to coming here when they were aged or infirm or sick or whatever, and suddenly it's shut down?
Well, that was the big problem because they were literally out on the street. And there's a lot of literature written in this time about the new problems faced by these people who had been looked after in hospitals and in monasteries and suddenly find themselves beggars, you know, going from town to town and trying to get some assistance. And it became a massive social problem.
Were there places they could stay?
Well, a lot of people start founding almshouses.
What's an almshouse?
Almshouses are smaller institutions. It's sort of sheltered accommodation, really, which is for the deserving poor, those people you know to be reputable, but who are perhaps elderly or disabled, and they can live there till they die.
If we can, we'd like to be able to prove when our medieval hall was built, because it may have been part of the original hospital built in the early 13th century. To do that, we're digging under one of our medieval walls in the hope that we can find some pottery that will date the construction of the building.
Here we are, look at this. There we are, that's got to be pot. Look, it's got a glaze on it.
good man. Now, that's what you're there for. As far as I'm concerned, this is the first really good piece of stratified pottery.
Just a bit of pot, but this should tell us when our building was first put up. And now, as we approach the end of the dig, just enough time to pull all the evidence together and see if we really have found one of the earliest buildings in Portsmouth.
What have you got there, Richard, for the inside wall?
21 foot 6.
By 50 foot. Is that likely for a medieval hall?
Yeah, that's fine, yeah.
That's excellent. That's really, really, really good. But, of course, what it doesn't give us is an absolute date. Show us the pottery.
We have got 2 bits of pottery, Tony, which Duncan has not seen before. Come on, give us an answer.
Oh, that's 13th century.
13th century!
Oh, hey! We've got our
good.
medieval hall, we've got our medieval hospital. Great, eh?
Wonderful.
Apparently it doesn't get better than this. These bits of 13th century pottery come from a vessel that would have looked like this and confirm that our building was part of the original hospital built around 1212 AD. This hall was a living space and a room where food was served, and maybe it's also where pilgrims sat down to eat. We've untangled these 2 walls and the floor of the building, but much more work will be needed to get the full story. Although the records tell us it was still standing in 1581, we now know it was demolished by the time this big wall of the governor's mansion was plonked down on top of it. So although we had to correct this plan, we now believe it's an accurate layout of the hospital buildings as they were when the hospital closed in the 16th century. And we can now create a reconstruction to show what the site looked like at that time. Our medieval hall, like these other big stone buildings, would have been one of the oldest in the town and hugely impressive in a world that was still largely made of wood. Built 300 years before the big defensive walls around the town, in medieval times it occupied a prime location near the sea and would have stood out like a beacon to any pilgrim arriving at the harbour nearby. At the Domus Dei, they could give thanks for a safe passage and look forward to a bed and a free meal.
To ensure you catch all the latest updates, please do subscribe to this channel, follow us on social media, and sign up to our newsletter and join us on Patreon.